Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Tuesday, May 6th, 2025. This is episode 380, and I'm going to talk about some of the um, excerpts, some passages that are out of the eighth grade history textbook that we're using in school. Sorry, I'm doing these episodes from the history textbook because they are interesting. It's something that I already went over today, and I'm really hectic with a lot of other things. So I haven't been able to look on X or listen to my normal slew of podcasts to have an idea just sort of percolate in my head. I've been looking for a job. The middle school where I'm teaching is closing. I didn't get fired, but it's closing, and so I'm looking for, uh, you know, a position somewhere else in another school. But university spots, they're probably already filled. I haven't heard a single thing from any university. And a lot of the local schools, well, they're public schools, and so they require certification, which I don't have. And besides, who teaches religion classes in public school, right? That ain't going to happen. And or race theory for that matter, libertarian race theory, that ain't going to happen. And so I'm basically confined to looking at private schools in subjects that I'm not really officially trained to teach, like eighth grade history. So anyway, so I'm going through uh, basically things that come up in our history text to kind of make it a little bit convenient for myself, get an episode in, keep you entertained, but also keep up with my job application pace. I did get to listen to the Gold Fix, which I always try to listen to over lunch with Vince Lancy, and he mentioned that China now is the place which determines the price of gold, right? The spot price of gold. Um, the typical patterns that normally one would see when the American markets are open, they're not there anymore. And you might know what I'm talking about. Around 9 and 9:30 every morning, the price of gold gets smashed, right? It's pushed down for some odd reason. But it doesn't, you don't see that anymore. And even if it does happen, it's not to the extent or to the amount that it used to be. Right. And basically, his argument was that when Chinese markets are open, they're doing a lot of buying, which then drives the price up, and the West cannot control it. It's just there's too much buying. The other story that I noticed, and this was from the other day, that Waltz was so quote unquote promoted. And he was someone who was prominent in some kind of foreign affairs thing. I forget exactly what his position was. But the rumor is that Trump got sick of him uh, promoting war all the time, and so he was given a higher position, but less influential one. I don't know. Probably like ambassador. Basically the name of it is that it's, oh, wow, you're this, but really it's more of a window dressing type position as opposed to someone who's in the trenches, as it were. I wish that's true, but on the other hand, Israel is ramping up its attacks on Gaza, and of course they're using U.S. supplied weapons. So I don't know, where it is. Again, I keep going back and forth, hearing people saying that Trump doesn't have a principle, he doesn't have a plan, he's just shooting from the hip, as it were, um, or he is trying to do something, but he's fighting against the deep state. I don't know. I don't know. It might even be that neither of those um, theories are true, right? But the killing is continuing. And I think it's kind of unfortunate for Israel that they have to live under a government like that. Apparently, half of the country opposes Netanyahu and all of this activity. Nevertheless, they keep pressing on. And it's sort of like here in the United States, where most of the country does not want war, yet no matter who you elect and no matter what candidate promises peace, you keep getting war once they take office. I think this warmongering mentality is supported by this superiority complex that we have here in America. I experienced it twice, right? The sudden realization, oh my goodness, I have a superiority complex that I'm looking down on an entire nation of people because I think I'm better because I'm from America. Yes, I know it's horrible, but I'm confessing, right? And the first time was when I went to Korea, the second time, right? So the first time I went to Korea, definitely Korea was still struggling, fighting a lot of poverty. There are a lot of people who are in a bad way economically. And then I went again, that was in 1983. And then I went again in 91, and I stayed for 3 years. And I suddenly realized that when it comes to electronic goods, Korea was much more advanced. They had things I didn't even see in the United States before I went. I pulled out my equipment, my listening devices, and I think I had a Walkman. And people just looked at me like, "What is that?" And I thought, "Oh, it's a Walkman." And they're like, "Yeah, but why do you have it?" And they had compact, mobile, portable compact disc players at the time, which was I never saw in America. And so I was like, "Oh," and I had to put it away because, I thought I was flexing and turns out I was embarrassing myself. Um, another time I had that experience, but I was in the United States, right? I was thinking, oh, the US has the best stuff. I'm researching the best stuff, and suddenly realized that no, I can't even access the best stuff because of the trade restrictions do not allow those superior electronic goods to be sold in the United States. That was like 30 years ago. So what are things like now? I do not know. And then the Judge Napolitano, he went to Russia and was amazed at how beautiful it was there. And Ray McGovern is in Iran right now, and where he's staying, it's really, really nice, which flies in the face of probably how most Americans imagine those places to be, right? Like dirt roads, people starving in the streets. No, it's not like that. That is rather what's happening here in the United States with all these homeless shelters, homeless people taking bowel movements on your front steps in San Francisco. I mean, come on, it's kind of ridiculous. Perhaps it's a bit of projection, if you will. But anyway, those are a couple things that came up in the few short podcasts I was able to listen to. But let's look at the textbook on World War II. Um, I just want to say before I read a couple of these excerpts that this is where a teacher uh, basically matters, right? Anyone can just sort of tell people to read a text, then generate a test on the text that you read. But to read it and then interpret it and then to put a different spin on it to get students to see a bigger picture, I think that's where a teacher really demonstrates whether they're qualified or not. So even if you have a horrible textbook, if the teacher is able to point out or even start a discussion over a problematic statement that's from the text, then that's, I think, all the better or more beneficial to the student. In other words, they're not going to just passively read or unconsciously read whatever and then memorize whatever they're supposed to memorize and have it influence them in their future, but rather to read and then all of a sudden be asked, what's going on in this text, right? And that's kind of what I'm sharing with you in this episode. These are some of the passages that we read today in my eighth grade class and some of the comments that I made after reading them. Okay, here's the first one. And we're talking about the beginning of World War II, coming out of the Great Depression. Unemployment was really high. And so now the war started, and this is where we pick up. Quote, in fact, the war brought something Americans desperately needed, jobs. Unemployment fell to less than 1%, and most of those were just moving between jobs. As the men left for the war, women went to work in record numbers. The image of Rosie the Riveter was a popular symbol of the working woman. Wages were good, and the government controls kept prices from rising too much. Um, and it goes on a little bit, but I paraphrase by saying, yeah, you couldn't buy a car, you couldn't buy a refrigerator, especially if your old refrigerator broke down, uh, because everyone was building weapons, right? So basically, society was not building beneficial things, but they were building things to destroy. And then this whole idea of jobs. Oh, yeah, everyone has a job now. Are you kidding? Right? How do you like, would you like a job where dying is a high probability? You know what I mean? It's like, oh, this is a great stable job. You might not make it to retirement, but hey, it's a great job. You'll be paid. You know, you were unemployed before. So, in other words, being recruited to fight in the military when there's a hot war going on, you know, the probability of dying, well, it's there. You can't ignore it. And then price controls. Well, price controls, right? Preventing prices from rising too high. Price controls means shortages, misallocation of resources, waste, black markets, smuggling, crime, all of this stuff. But of course, you're going to say, oh, yes, the government prevented the prices from rising too much, right? We won't discuss how that creates shortages or empty shelves or a thriving black market. We won't talk about that, right? We'll just focus on the fact that the prices of the products that should have been on those shelves were not allowed to rise too much. Like, it really doesn't matter what the price is if there's nothing to buy, right? The store shelves are empty. So there's that. And then women going to work. Now, I don't know how many of your listeners are women, uh, but do women really want to work? I mean, ask anyone. Would you rather work or would you rather lounge around all day at home? And a lot of people will say, yeah, I'd rather stay at home. Because after the war was over and all the men came home, a lot of the women quit work, right? And the female employment rates remained low until you get to the 1960s. Now, the feminists would want to take credit for women going back to work in the 1960s, but other people might say that it was the downturn in the economy, or perhaps Vietnam, I don't know, the downturn in the economy, which then had to push women back to work because families could not make it with one income, right? Particularly after 1971, when we came off the gold standard and inflation started to pick up. Women had to go to work if they wanted to maintain the same lifestyle, if the family wanted to maintain the same standard of living. Uh, I gotta say that even my wife, as soon as we got married, she stopped working. Anyway, that's another story. She might listen to this and I'll be in trouble. Anyway, so here's another passage, and I quote, many items were in dangerously short supply. Aha. One of the most serious shortages was rubber. The Japanese captured much of the Southeast Asia. That was the source of most of the world's natural rubber needed for all cars, ships, and planes. The US created a synthetic rubber industry, end quote. And so I read this and for the first time last year, and my mind was blown, and I just, called the eighth graders, called their attention to this. I'm like, do you not see what we just read? Well, first of all, uh, when it says, oh, many items were in dangerously short supply, I was like, oh, they're going to talk about the shortages now as a result of the price controls. Nope. They wanted to talk about the fact that the Japanese had cut off the supply of rubber to the United States. So how are you going to not only have rubber for tires, but also for the gaskets, right? So the what do you call them? The washers, right? So when you connect two things, right, in order to prevent leaking, you have a rubber lining, right, to prevent leakage, right? So that's made of rubber too. So where are we going to get all of the rubber? Well, somebody came up with synthetic rubber, artificial rubber. You don't need real rubber. In fact, even today, the tires on the cars are only 28% natural real rubber. And then you have 28% which is synthetic, and the rest of it is like steel and all the other reinforcement stuff they put in tires these days. But a synthetic rubber industry, you realize that this idea of shortage, right? So the government likes to scare people with the idea, oh, we'll have shortages, right? We won't have oil any longer. We won't have, stuff to power our cars any longer. The Germans also had the same problem, so they came up with diesel, right? An alternative to gasoline, right? Because they didn't have any left, right? They didn't have any more. So whenever there is a shortage, it sparks innovation, creativity. It sort of puts the challenge out there to somebody to come up with something that is an alternate, but yet can serve a similar or the same function. In fact, rising prices as a result of shortages, like if prices were allowed to rise by the American government instead of having price controls, rising prices also incentivizes innovation for cheaper alternatives, right? So the next time, someone says, "Oh, we're not going to have enough of this or that. Oh, if the Russians take over all of that, then we won't have any left." Rest assured that someone will come up with an alternative, as long as people are free to do so, as long as the information flows freely, as long as uh, politicians don't cater to an already existing agency which lacks imagination and prevents people from developing alternatives and instead double down and protect what they believed is the only source and the only way to go when it comes to resources or energy, right? So do we have to go to war because someone else is going to take over all these oil fields? No, not necessarily. I mean, you can talk to them. Fracking is another example. I don't know if you remember. It used to be that everyone in college classrooms all across America talked about fracking. But then I realized in the last few years I was there in university, no one talked about fracking, right? There used to be people would watch that documentary where someone turns on the water, the faucet in their sink, and then they light it on fire. And it's because of fracking. I don't know if you remember that. But fracking made a comeback, right? It was a technology that existed like over 100 years ago. But people decided that it wasn't worthwhile to do it because it was so expensive. But now, or back in the day or a few years ago, when oil price got really high, it became economic. It became a viable alternative to do fracking. Uh, and of course, fracking gives us liquid natural gas. So that I thought was kind of interesting, right? So if you think that you're going to have a shortage, well, let people come up with something, right? Let the imagination run. Let people be creative and innovative to come up with an alternative instead of having to go to war. Here's another passage. Quote, American industry performed miracles in World War II, Cargo ships were desperately needed to move supplies to Europe. In 1941, such ships required almost a year to build. That was cut to less than 2 months in 1942. By the war's end, they were being built in 12 days, using new techniques that prefabricated the pieces and lifted them into place. One cargo ship was built in 4 days. Huh. Imagine that. A cargo ship which used to require 1 year to build now only took 4 days. Now, whoa, wait a minute. So where's that technology now? Is it unused? Has it been regulated away? If you go back to episode 138, I talk about fast building. And if you Google, you can, or YouTube, there's a video of a 57-story building in China being built in 19 days. 57-story building in 19 days. All the electrical, all the plumbing, all of that stuff completed as well. And the way they do that is they prefabricate the pieces and then they take it into the city where the building is going up and they put it together like Lego. There's another video where 10 stories go up in 28 hours. All right. And you might not believe this. You might think that it's unsafe. You might think that there's got to be lots of problems. But, where one of my kids works, they just they built a brand new high school, except it is plagued with so many problems. And one might think that, well, it took them like 2, 3 years to build and probably cost millions of dollars. And it had all these problems, right? Or you could just do it in 19 days, a 57-story building in 19 days. And so, you'd know that there were problems right away. You wouldn't have to wait 3 years. So there's that. And so perhaps the United States has decided that it is better to have overpriced, expensive, poor quality buildings instead of having, all right buildings, all right quality buildings in 19 days. Like if you find a lot of flaws, just tear it down and build it again in 19 days. It just doesn't seem like that difficult of a task. But of course, you got to protect the union jobs. You got to protect all these quote unquote high paying jobs. Like no one ever thinks that maybe they could get different jobs as part of the fast build industry, but right, because what's happening now is that if buildings are so cheap, you can make them so quickly, everyone is going to want to modernize their building. And so you're going to be busy all year round for years, rebuilding, tearing down and building with this super fast method. It saves people money and you make more because you're now building more buildings. It's basically the Henry Ford story, right? Assembly line production, except now you're building buildings. It's cheaper, more affordable, and the people who work in that industry make a lot more money. Basically, this is a story of incentives, right? The way they describe World War II is all about incentives, government control, and a bunch of what if. So, incentives. If government is paying for the goods, then they're overpaying for the goods, like for bombs and guns, right? They're paying so much better these factories that instead of making refrigerators, they're making, I don't know, Jeeps for the army, right? Well, hey, I'm making refrigerators. Why would I want to make Jeeps or tanks? Oh, you're going to pay me that much? Of course, forget the refrigerators. I want to make money. And so they, convert the machinery in their factory and they start making weapons because the government is footing the bill and they always overpay and you're going to overcharge. And so you're going to make money hand over fist. So people don't have refrigerators. That's okay because I'm making a lot of money. And so basically what I'm saying is that when the government is in charge of the budget, businesses will rather make weapons than refrigerator or appliances because they're going to make a lot more money, right? The government is going to pay them more for making those products. But on the other hand, the quality of life of everyone who lives in that country that's making all these weapons is lower. And we already saw that in from the textbook, right? So that's one line of thinking that one must keep in mind. The other is that government control means misallocation of resources. Instead of, directing the energy and power of the United States for producing goods that are helpful for people's lives, they're now building things which will destroy other people's infrastructure, other people's schools, other people's factories, right? And so not only have you wasted all this money to build things which don't improve the quality of life in America, but you're going to take those things that we produced and destroy other society, the value in other societies. So basically history books are selling death as a career option, as a national project. Like, ooh, let's just engage in war all the time. And I haven't done the research, but I always suspected that this is why Switzerland became a forever neutral country, because they realized just how horribly wasteful all of this is. And finally, what if America focused on peace? Uh, the Soviet Union fell without firing a shot. Well, literally, there were a lot of proxy wars, but there was no direct conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union. Uh, and that was not the best way to take down a authoritarian government, but it shows that the more control that a government has and the lack of freedom, the quicker the downfall of that country or that government will be, right? So the Soviet Union fell quickly uh, because the power of the government was absolute, and there was very little freedom among the people. That brings about the downfall of that country very, very quickly. And perhaps we're on that cusp, right? We are such a mess and things are accelerating. I mean, the center of business is shifting out of the United States to Asia. Well, this all could be wrong. I could be blowing smoke. So hedge your bets, be ready, talk and debate with anyone who will talk to you in order to learn, for them to learn and for you to learn. For my part, I got Jesus. I know it's weird to say that, but I got Jesus. So no matter what happens, for me, staying true to what I believe takes priority. Of course, doing it as comfortably as possible helps a lot, which is why I'm trying to get another job, right? I have an interview in 2 weeks, hopefully two other leads. So wish me luck, and I will talk to you next time.